The snow is going to increase in intensity across Arkansas through the overnight and then into Mississippi. Now, the afternoon European still trying to show that snow across northern Mississippi. I want to dive into the HRRR, which is showing more of a mixed precip setup, but the heavy snow looking likely, though, for Tennessee, and there could be several inches. One thing to watch, too, would be on the northern side of this, there could be a band of heavier snow up into southern Missouri, southern parts of Illinois, also Indiana. We could get a couple of inches out of this, too, that could be highly impactful, and then this snow continues to push off to the east. We're going to time all this out and go a little bit closer in just a second. I want to give you a big overview and show you how, as this storm gets close to the coast, everything up here is pretty light. The heaviest band of snow will be here, and there's just not a lot of support for our storm to move up the coast. If anything, this snow back here is being caused by this trough that's swinging through, some really light snow impacting parts of Pennsylvania, New York, into the northeast. Here comes our next system. That's going to bring more snow into the Great Lakes as we get closer to next week. Let's get a little bit closer with the snow and the sleet and the freezing rain, and we'll show you what the newest data is showing. And I think it's giving us an idea that these heavier snow bands are still going to develop tonight into tomorrow. So by 1 a.m. Central, this is 2 a.m. Eastern time here on this particular model run on the HRRR. We've got some heavy snow going now from Hot Springs, Arkansas, north up to Little Rock, and now a mix of snow, sleet, and probably more freezing rain here across southern Arkansas, and then back to Texarkana, a mixed bag here, and then back into Texas, we see that rain, even further south, change over to some snow. The snow starts to pick up also into Missouri overnight. By 4 a.m., 5 a.m., we start to continue to see that push off to the east, and now we've got the sleet and the freezing rain into parts of Alabama. The HRRR still trying to show some heavy snow into northern parts of Mississippi. Winter storm warnings are out, okay? So there you go. And then as we move into the early morning hours, so this would be 5 a.m. Central, 6 a.m. Eastern, we've got that snow heavier bands moving into Memphis. Not quite up to Bowling Green just yet, not quite to Nashville. It's still just to your west, but the snow starts to pick up towards Jackson, and then north of that into parts of Illinois. Lighter amounts up here, some light snow possible for Chicago into central Illinois, and then everything continues to push off to the east. This could be some really heavy snow across northern Alabama for a period of time before we switch over to some ice. Let's go further to the east. We'll give you a different vantage point right now as we move into the early morning hours. By sunrise, we've got the snow going here into Tennessee. We've talked about that, but look at the ice going here across central Georgia. So middle Georgia, we've got some ice on the way, and up to Atlanta. I mean, I think we started some snow, and then potentially, especially south of town on I-75, if you move south of Atlanta going down towards Macon, you're going to run into more sleet, freezing rain, more of that mixed precipitation, and then back towards Birmingham. Sleet, freezing rain, all possible back here. We'll look at those totals, which I got to tell you, the forecast is really impressive to look at that because it could cause, again, power outages, down trees and limbs. Freezing rain is not what you want to see with a winter storm. It's not looking good. Now, as we move into the afternoon, this is what I'm talking about. Just north. I mean, you've got your low like this just north of where that transition happens between sleet and freezing rain over to snow. I think you get a heavy thump of snow, and it could come down really quick. An inch, maybe 2. I dare say 3 inches an hour. I don't know if we'll see that much, but easily 1 to 2 inches an hour in some of these heavier bands that try to set up. Predicting exactly where they'll be is next to impossible. I was reading some of the National Weather Service forecast discussions. I can't remember what weather forecast office it was from, but they were talking about that. And the idea is here on some of these short-range models across Tennessee and then arguably across parts of South Carolina as we head into Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon, the snow very close to West Virginia. It holds off, I think, until the evening hours, but starting to move into Southwest Virginia and then into central North Carolina. So we've got the snow here into Charlotte sometime into the afternoon, 2, 3 p.m. Snowing back into Asheville by the evening rush hour, and now we've got the snow moving into northern South Carolina. So right along the North Carolina-South Carolina line. This has snow down to Rock Hill. So Charlotte, Rock Hill, once you get down towards Columbia, you're talking about more of a mix of sleet and freezing rain, and then maybe even over to Augusta. You know, in this region, it's certainly not inconceivable that we could see some accumulating ice to start with this. For Augusta, right now, as of the recording of this video, winter weather advisory is out, but head north up towards Greenwood and Anderson into South Carolina, we've got winter storm warnings here. Over towards Orangeburg and Sumter, South Carolina, winter weather advisories, but up towards Camden, we've got winter storm warnings, and that could be because you get a heavy dump of snow. Now you get some sleet, and it could accumulate too, several inches. As we move through the night, snow now moving, spreading, and really continuing to push off to the east here, and it could be heavy here into parts of southwest Virginia and northern North Carolina. We're moving into the evening hours. It's getting cooler. The sun's gone, so we could probably accumulate a little better than if this was 10 in the morning going into the day. Overnight, that snow spreads north, too, into parts of Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York. This is much lighter here. It's easy to see those darker blues here, and that's across now southeast Virginia into really northern North Carolina and back toward Raleigh. You can see we start as snow, sleet, freezing rain, and we try to mix over to just plain rain here toward the end of this. Now, I do want to go in just a touch closer here, mostly into North Carolina, because I think some of this precipitation, at least the type, is going to be very tricky here, not just into South Carolina, but also into North Carolina. I'm going to push this forward ahead in time, so now we're in a little bit closer. You can see that heavy band of snow trying to set up by the 5 p.m. hour here, and then moving east toward the Roanoke Valley. It's snowing in Hickory by this point. It's snowing, at least starting to snow in Greensboro, and look how this heavy snow is trying to pick up right here near Rockingham, right on the North Carolina line here. Pretty interesting. So this could get quite treacherous as far as the travel goes, with some sleet and freezing rain on top of that from Charlotte over to Greenville and then up into the mountains here into western North Carolina. As we head into the late evening, there comes the mixed precipitation, so you can see that in the pink here up toward Raleigh, maybe some heavy snow, and then we go over to some freezing rain and then over towards Greenville. Out toward the coast, though, mostly just rain down here towards Wilmington, Myrtle Beach, even over toward Columbia. We start as mixed precipitation, but we end as rain, and the cold air is entrenched here across northern North Carolina and Virginia. The further north you are, the better chance you have of staying all snow, and that might happen here from, again, Mount Airy. I don't know. Greensboro is going to be very close. We may actually end up mixing with some sleet and freezing rain and then going back to a little bit of snow on the end. But look how heavy that snow gets here into southeast Virginia. Again, that's where the winter storm watches are out right now. That could all be updated overnight, so make sure you monitor weather.gov for the latest. Let's talk about the totals. These are the official forecast numbers across Arkansas up into Oklahoma. Again, 8 inches plus, some areas close to a foot. I think especially with those heavy bands of snow with some ice here across this region, a closer look into Arkansas where it is currently snowing. And I think there will be some overperforming numbers here as some of those heavier bands move through. Further to the north, the snow tapers off once you get outside of the southern part of Missouri, a little bit further to the north, up towards St. Louis. We're talking about 2 to 4, back into southeast parts of Kansas. Very, very little snow here up towards Kansas City, but maybe a little more here closer to the Oklahoma line, where we're looking at 2 to 4 inches of snow, and then down into Tulsa, 2 to 4, and then it picks up dramatically as you head down into Oklahoma. A little bit further to the east, we talked about back here towards Arkansas. Look at Mississippi. I think you've really got to watch here. There could be more freezing rain and sleet. That's going to eat into your totals, and that's why this forecast, I think, is reflecting closer to 1 to 4 inches here. That's the same thing over into Alabama. More ice now being forecast here. If you pop that over to freezing rain, you're starting to see this show up in some of the latest runs. So there you go, across parts of Mississippi, also over into Alabama, that freezing rain showing up. Up into Tennessee, again, quite a bit of snow possible out of this. We could see several inches into Nashville, 6 inches or more in some areas. It certainly would not shock me to see that. A little bit further to the north, too, up into Kentucky, Louisville, over to Lexington, a solid 3 to 6, I think, at this point. And now you get into Tennessee. This is the official forecast. That's a solid 6+, pretty much across the central part of Tennessee, from Nashville over to Cookeville and Crossville, and even into Knoxville. We're talking about 3 to 6 inches of snow. Winter storm warnings are all out for these areas. A little bit further to the east, there's the snow total forecast for parts of North Carolina down into Georgia. I think a solid 2 to 4 inches here with sleet and ice. That's going to be a huge problem across this region. If you were to look at those freezing rain totals, you're going to see that in just a second. Definitely elevated across this region. Let's just go ahead and do that. So across North Georgia, I mean, you change forecast zones here, so there's some disagreement here, I guess, with the weather forecast offices. But into Georgia, we saw the National Weather Service forecast office out of Peachtree City talking about how some of these areas could see some significant icing. And you're starting to see that reflected in their forecast, too, with more than 1/4 of an inch of ice for some of these areas. And that pushes into the upstate of South Carolina. Again, tree damage would be the problem, power outages, and very, very slick road conditions as we head into the overnight into early Saturday. Further to the east, the snow gets a little bit lighter here into North Carolina, not as much. We're not looking at the 6+ inches, but still a solid 2 to 4 inches of snow with ice further to the south and up into West Virginia, a couple of inches out of this. It's definitely not a huge snowstorm for the southern Appalachians. I mean, we've seen much more snow than this. You're talking about, I would say on average, somewhere in this region, 2 to 4, some areas locally 6. And then there's already some snow on the ground, so it's going to feel like it's even bigger snow than it really is. Further to the east, where there's not as much snow, and we've seen very little, if any, snow here into the North Carolina region, it might be the first snow you've seen in years. The HRRR, I'm going to go to this for just a second. Okay, so it's picking up on some of those heavier bands across Arkansas, and I think it's doing pretty good. But look how heavy it's trying to show some of those heavier bands into East Tennessee, also into parts of North Carolina. I want to go in a little bit closer here on the HRRR because it definitely looks pretty aggressive with some of these numbers here. Timing some of this out, it's trying to put almost, I'm just going to say 7 inches up towards the Tri-Cities into far southwest Virginia, and even here into North Carolina. I think this is overly aggressive, but the idea that there could be some heavier bands within that forecasted numbers that I showed you is on the table, I think. And the HRRR, I think, is picking up on that. Now, is it going to be exactly placed over Greensboro? Is it going to be just to the south of that toward Asheboro? Is it going to be maybe a little bit further north into Virginia towards Danville, Martinsville, over to South Boston? I don't know. And I think that's a very tough thing to call, especially when you get these very small features that start to form within your snowstorm. Certainly on the table, the idea of that heavier snow showing up. Now, further to the north, lower amounts up toward the Great Lakes. However, I will say this is the snow that we're going to pick up through the weekend. A good 2 to 4 inches of snow somewhere in this region. That goes up into southern Ontario too, with lighter amounts, maybe traced to an inch here across the East Coast, with some higher amounts up here into the Green and White Mountains into the Northeast. Look at the lake effect that starts to pick up. Some really cold air moves in next week with our next storm, and that's going to really drop our temperatures. This is the GFS from this afternoon. Once this storm moves offshore, we will quiet down. It's going to stay cold, though, so anything that falls is probably going to stick around for at least a little while. And then now we're watching this system moving through the northern plains. It's going to bring our next chance of snow. It's been a while since we've seen really a lot of snow into Wisconsin, so some snow here. It's not going to be the big snow for you guys, but some precipitation on the way here in the form of snow. Cold air building in behind this. We're going to stay cold here as our front moves through. A little bit of snow shower activity here in the Ohio Valley, moving toward the East Coast. And then the most boring weather you can imagine for January is on the way as high pressure builds in. It's not going to be the most boring weather. It's going to be cold, I can tell you that. But this is cold, Arctic, dry, high pressure, pushing that cold air into the East Coast, down into the Great Lakes. That's going to really kick that lake effect up. And now we're watching some Pacific air starting to move in. And this might give you a January thaw here for areas, I think, maybe here west. Temperatures on the way up, northwest flow here, keeping it cold in the Northeast.